Floss and Fly, presented by Say It Loud Canada, the ultimate financial literacy program, brought to you by the Black Business and Professional Association and the Donald Reid Estate. Here are your hosts from Flip, Floss, and Fly, Andre Smith, financial literacy expert and poet, Farley Flex, social activist and entertainment trailblazer, and Robert Brereton, social entrepreneur and conflict management specialist.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us on another edition of Flip, Floss, and Fly. It's a pleasure to have you this morning with us. We appreciate you. Just wanted to say thank you very much for everybody who joined us last week for our Caravana special edition. We had special guest Jay Martin, but we are on back the regular track today. So we have our host with the most, Farley Flex, and our presenter, financial literacy guru, Andre Smith. Farley, before we get to Andre, what's going on? How are you this morning?
I just want to echo your sentiment. I feel fantastic, as I always choose to do. I think that coming out of Emancipation Day weekend, Caravana, as we've known it for those of us who've been in the city for an extended period of time, it's a great time to align things like that with your energy and your sense of purpose and your willingness and desire to learn and absorb and apply, right? Remember one key thing: knowledge without application is fruitless. You could know the encyclopedia or the Wikipedia nowadays from front to back, but if you don't apply the knowledge that you've acquired, right, then it's all really futile. It's what I would like to refer to as a colossal waste of time.
All right. Andre Smith, what's going on, my brother? How are you?
I am good. I mean, as I said earlier, trying to finish up some moving this weekend, but I'm actually feeling great. I got up this morning and my spirit was lifted, and I'm feeling fantastic. And I actually have a poem, and I feel like it's fitting for this week's session that I'm going to be sharing this poem that I wrote. And thanks to Farley, who gave me some coaching about creating different style. So I'm gonna change the style and how I present this week's poem. So yeah, I'm excited.
Feeling good, like Nina Simone.
Good. Yeah. What about you?
I'm well, my brother. So far, so good. All things considered, highly favored and blessed. So we're just about to take it right now to the rest. So
right.
you know, people on the chat, let us know how you're feeling this morning. Just put in 1-2 words. Let us know how you're feeling.
Yeah, that'd be beautiful.
Tell a friend to join us right now. Tell a friend. It's not too late. Share that link. And let's
never too late to make it great.
Great. Right. Blessed.
Okay.
They're coming in. Having a blessed day so far. Excited. Keep them coming. Keep them coming.
We want to hear from everybody.
Yep.
We want to hear from, as they say, everybody and their grandmother.
Everybody on the ground.
Excited for the day. Fantastic. Great morning. I was actually, okay, that went quick. These are coming in quick, boy. I love it. Let me put it on my large screen now.
All right. We have
it's actually playing
45 people so far.
Hold on. Jody was playing the same song at home.
All right. Amazing. She's feeling good.
So much so she thought the sound was coming from her own laptop. I like that.
All right.
Optimistic. Liberated.
Right.
Good word. Liberated. I love that. Happy, great, pumped, amazing. Right? Internalize these words, folks. One thing we have to do as a people is make sure when we hear words, right, words that are inspiring and motivational, absorb them and apply them. Okay?
Fabulous. I love the combination of both words there.
Great word.
Future looking.
Future looking. Nice.
Yep.
Somebody's looking forward. Beautiful.
Good,
Ready
good.
to be productive. Love it. Love it. Keep them coming.
All right. So Andre, let's get started, my brother.
All right, let's take it to them. So it's week 8, and like I said, we're gonna be making it great. So for those who are joining for the first time, again, my name is Andre Smith, and I'm the financial literacy guru, as Roderick said earlier. I'm from Jamaica, and I live here in Canada. I went to York University. I did my bachelor's degree in accounting with honors. I'm the founder of FLIP and FLOSS. So FLIP and FLOSS is acronym for Financial Literacy and Investor Program, and future leaders obtaining sufficient skills. For me, I wanted to help Black youth and families make better financial decisions. And I wanted to appeal to them in a way that they understand. And so this is what inspired Flip and Floss. We flip that money and we floss, but we're not flossing in the traditional sense. We are using money to the best of our abilities to create, generate, and transfer wealth and developing leaders. I also have a tax and consulting business called Easy Solution Tax and Consulting Services. So I do personal taxes, corporate taxes, and you name it. This year, I got the 2020 CBC Community Champion Award for my work around financial literacy. And I know those who have been here forever, and I see some repeated faces and names. You're probably thinking that I'm a scratch record. Sorry, I'm not. I'm just, trying to introduce myself to those who have already been here. And so I'm gonna start off by sharing my poem for this week. And like I said, I kind of changed the tune and how I present it. So this week's poem is called Seeking Solace. And just like the song says, it's a new day, right? And this poem was actually inspired when I went to my new house and I was sitting and I was just thinking to myself, and all I heard was this loud tick-tock from the clock. And I started thinking. And as I started thinking, I started writing. It's crazy. I never had so much love for writing, but it just came naturally, I guess. All right. Tick-tock, tick-tock. I sit quietly in a brightly lit room, bounded by four walls and no escape. I hear the sound from the clock mounted on my wall, so near yet so far. My imagination goes wild as I started to ponder what beautiful world we live in with so many wonders. Our imagination, purpose, and passion brings about unity in a different fashion. As the clock ticks, I think about life holistically. I realize I can't take back the hands of time. I looked out my window at the sky as I wondered what my purpose is. Then I suddenly noticed that when heaven, earth, and a powerful mind collides, it creates a robust vibration down my spine. I thought about how I got here, but even those who discovered their purpose think it is not clear. I wondered how other great leaders felt when they gave it all to make hearts melt. I like to call it majestical, but that is when hope itself appears whimsical. Tick-tock, tick-tock, time is so powerful, yet so many waste it being grudgeful. This world is full of hate, treachery, and loneliness, but amidst it all is great success. The universe is a beautiful place, and we will discover it when we start to embrace. I learned to live my today as if it is the last, because my past is a steep contrast. We must live, love, laugh, and be at peace with the world, because peace would never be, because without peace, there would never be, we would never be at ease. All right, so that's called Seeking Solace. It's very reflective, and it talks about, being in my past and, being imaginative and the future and just being at peace with the world and with yourself, loving yourself and appreciating yourself. All right. So give me some IRA if you like my poem. If you don't like it, give me some thumbs down, but I'm pretty sure you have to like it. You don't have a choice because you're participating in my webinar. All right. All right, so we're gonna start with a trivia question. And so for those joining for the first time, so if you answer the question correctly, you'll be getting a $25 gift card, right? So to answer the question, you need to unmute yourself and answer the question via the video, all right? So from our previous discussion, or even if you know the answer, please tell me what is a stale dated check, a future dated check, and a bounce check. And remember, we talked about that, we clarified the last time a bounce check doesn't mean it literally bounce, all right? So hopefully we are not saying a bounce check bounces.
And just to let you know, we've got the gift cards in now, so they will be going out. We've got a record of everybody who was won a prize thus far, and they'll be going out this week. So fear not, we are keeping our words.
We have our historical data.
So what is a still check, still dated check, a future dated check, and a bounce check?
Hello? Oh, sorry.
So we got Nathan on. Nathan,
Hello?
how are you this morning, my brother?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Are you gonna take a shot at what a still dated check, a future dated check, and a bounce check is?
Yeah. So from last session, of what I understand, a still dated check is a check when you go to cash out a check that is past the date that is on the check.
How long past the date on the check?
Pardon?
How long past the date on the check?
I'm not sure.
All right. And what's future dated and bounce check?
A future dated check is a check with the future date on it.
Okay.
So on that future date, that's when you cash out the check. And then a bounce check is when you go to cash out on a check, but it bounces because there's not enough money in your
Awesome.
account.
All right, good job, Nathan. Thank you.
Good job.
So, yep, you're 100% right, except for the timeline for the still dated check. It's 6 months, but definitely you are right. Thanks for participating. That's what we're talking about. That's confidence there, and we appreciate you coming on and answering that question. Thank you so much, Nathan. You are the winner of this week's trivia question.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Not only that, we always applaud when an individual goes first. We always have to, that's
Yes.
from historical, personal, social, networking standpoint. The person who steps up and goes first always gets a round of applause. So you guys could do some sort of, I don't know if the reactors have a hand clap or what it has. We'll go with a thumbs up and a hand up. There we go.
Some clapping, some irie.
All right. And Nathan, if you could please share with BBPA privately your information for the your contact information, so that we can mail you the.
And that would be the information of your parents, Nathan, because I think you're underage. So how well, I don't even need to know how young you are. I know you're young. So just make sure your parents are okay with you sending out your address and their information, please. Is that cool, Nathan?
Yes, thank you.
All right.
All right.
So make sure you message us privately, and we'll send that off to you.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, awesome. So, like I said, we're in week 8. We're gonna be making everything great. I mean, we've already been making it great, but it gets greater, right? And we are going over into the next segment, right? We're gonna be talking about will, insurance, and estate planning. So sit back, grab your mug, grab your bottle of water, anything you want to grab, and let's have some meaningful discussion, right? This is so I actually went to a photo shoot yesterday for my book, and I used a photographer by the name of Gina. She's Black and from the community. She's awesome, and she took some great pictures. And while I was there taking the pictures, I came up with this quote, right? That says, "Cherish wisdom and you will grow. Love yourself and you will glow," right? We have to continue to learn and educate ourselves, and we have to love ourselves. We have to first learn to value ourselves so that other people will value us, right? So as we learn about financial literacy, we have to learn about leadership and loving and valuing ourselves, valuing our neighbors, valuing other members of the community, all right? So just a quick disclaimer here. This presentation is not, and nothing in it should be construed as an offer, invitation, or recommendation in respect of a company's credit facilities or any of a company's securities, or an offer, invitation, or recommendation to sell, or solicitation of an offer to buy the facilities or any of a company's security in any jurisdiction. Neither this presentation nor anything in it shall form the basis of a contract or commitment. This presentation is not intended to be relied upon as advice to investors or potential investors, and does not take into account the investment objectives, financial situation, or needs of any investor. All investors should consider such factors in consultation with a professional advisor of their choosing when deciding if an investment is appropriate. By participating in this session, attendees agree to indemnify and hold harmless Andre Smith, Flip and Floss, aka Flip and Floss, Easy Solution Tax and Consulting Services, Urban Res, BBPA, and all of his partners of any and all legal liabilities and proceedings. Let's have fun. I know that was a mouthful and it sounds serious, but don't get too worked up about it. It has to be done. All right, so let's do a quick review from the previous class. I know in other sessions, I usually start a quick review by going over things, but I want to start a little different now. And I want to ask if anyone has any question from the previous material or any of the prior session, because by asking questions, it helps to build confidence, and it also helps to clarify any misunderstanding. So I want to hear if you are having any misunderstanding or any stuck points that you want us to clarify. It might be anything from one of the previous session or something you've heard outside of this presentation. So let's give a few minutes there to, and please come online. Please come on the video. Come on live. I want to hear your voice. All right, don't be afraid.
Can I ask something?
Sure.
I was quite inspired by a previous session you had when you talk about the power of the community in buying into assets, land, real estate, investment. And I wouldn't say I was troubled. I was moved by it. It kept on my mind. And based on how I think, if something is troubling me, it means I have to talk about it to do something, and I like to do something. Mm-hmm. I would very much like to see from this evidence. I like evidence-based things because I know many of us will take away individual pieces and work it. As a collective, how can we, as precedent setting, because I love that, do something that would all mark this session that says, as a group, we did this, and this came out of it. I know it has nothing to do with you, but it has everything to do with those that are participating. Who among us will take the baton and says, okay, we heard Andre tell us that we can partner and put some financial, some muscle into something and buy something, invest in something, to say, when we did this session, out of this came this investment, and boy, it taking steam, because I know our culture, we love evidence-based. We're not going to do nothing if we see something happen. And we jump on because we want to be trailblazers. And in this time where, the atmosphere is encouraging the blackness of us and our culture, what can we do? I am fired up. I hear all this and I want to put something into it.
So Marlene, if I could respond, it sounds like something you're energized by and about. So you have the full liberty amongst the group, if you use your everyone chat, to say, is anyone interested in having that dialogue, right? Okay. You may not know what exactly it is you want to do, but I'm sure there are people online here and who have been coming consistently that may be interested in something like that. So that's something you can actually instigate or inspire offline, right? But yeah, absolutely. We do need more collective social investment, if you will.
Yes. And we're looking for, and especially we're looking for the young people to take this charge.
Right, exactly.
Yes. I'm willing to work. I'm willing to work behind the scenes, but I'm willing to push it with finances and resources and stuff. But I want some young people, men, especially young men and young ladies, to take this one up. If you can help me to, I don't know how we can do this. That's something.
You can create that dialogue in the chat, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, just
all right.
Send a message in the chat. And another thing too, we can get involved in the. So right now, a few Black-led organizations are working toward PACO, which is the Pan-African Credit Union.
Yes, I saw
that. That's another way we can get involved. Yes.
Yeah, but we're waiting for the piece about the initiative. It's already feasible. So I was listening to Don in Watergwan last night, and the guy came on and said they're at the stage where the legislative part. So, but in the meantime, we can have our little thing. So when it's ready, we just have our little the lump sum to say, yes, we
Right,
are.
right.
That's no, I'm
Yeah. No, I
proactive.
love the idea.
All
Yeah.
right. Okay, so
take charge, Molly.
I will.
Take
Thank
charge.
you.
Yeah, take charge.
Thank you for the approval. Here we go.
No, you don't need
Remember
our
my
approval.
point.
That's my point. You don't
So
need our
close yet
approval.
so far. Even though you're far, we can let it happen still.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing. Anyone else? Any other question or anything burning inside that you want to discuss before we continue? So this week's session is going to be a bit heavy. So any questions? All right.
Before you start, Andre, the word of the day from the FLY component is challenge. How are you going to challenge yourself? Step outside of the box, go that extra step, that extra mile to get what you need done. All right, so keep in mind, bear in mind, while we're doing this session today, challenge. You've got to challenge yourself. Comfort is only for so long. You've got to be in discomfort to continue that comfort stage. You've got to challenge yourself to become what you are destined to be. All right? Right to you, Andre.
All right, thank you. Love it. So as Nathan beautifully put it earlier, so in the last session, we talked about different types of checks. So stale dated checks. So if you wrote someone a check and or someone writes you a check and you have it in your possession for 6 months without cashing it, and cashing meaning bringing it to a financial institution to get it converted to cash or deposited in your account. If you hold it for 6 months, it becomes stale dated, meaning it's no longer valid and they have to write you a new check. The only exception to this is government checks. So government checks, they don't have any expiry date, right? And so we also talked about a post-dated check, which is a check written into the future. So if it is that you want to pay someone, let's say in September, you can write them the check right now, or they can write you the check. However, you wouldn't be able to cash that check until that future date comes or after the future date. And a bounce check is a check where either you write someone a check or someone writes you a check, but there's insufficient amount in the account. And as Michael brought up in the last session, if you knowingly write a check for more than that is in the account, it's illegal to do that, right? That's fraud. And so you don't want to be doing that, okay? We also talked about online banking and some of the risk and the rewards with online banking. So we talked about some of the rewards being convenient, being accessible from anywhere around the world. Some of the challenges, obviously with security, and you have to be careful, especially around the holiday seasons. A lot of scammers like to send fake emails about e-transfer or what they call phishing emails to get your personal information. So be very careful when you're banking, and please do not, do not give your personal information to anyone, right? It's, our personal information is very serious and somebody can actually steal your identity using your personal information, all right? All right, so just some quick learning objectives here. So by the end of this session, you should know what is an estate, what is estate planning, what is a will, types of will, and some key concepts such as trustee, settler, and executor. All right. See, I have some reactions going off in the chat. Let's see. All right. So a quick definition of an estate here. So an estate is everything comprising the net worth of an individual, including land, real estate, possessions, financial securities, cash, and other assets. So I don't know if you are noticing, but you are starting to see everything that we've been talking about from week one is starting to come together, right? Because we've talked about net worth last week, right? So that's how much you are worth, right? And that's the difference between your asset. An asset is something that you own, right? That has future value, right? And your liability. So liability is what you owe, right? So that is your net worth. We've talked about different types of assets such as land and real estate. And we also talked about the fact that land doesn't depreciate. So land generally goes up in value. The only time you'll find that land depreciates is if there is some kind of waste or spill or something happened to the land. But generally, for the most part, it doesn't depreciate. We've talked about real estate as well. So having multiple properties, either here in Canada or elsewhere around the world. Possession. So if you have any arts or artifacts, or I know some people like to collect rare stamps or rare possessions. Those are assets, right, that can be sold. They have future economic value, right? We've talked about some financial securities such as stocks, right? And we've talked about bonds. So a bond, like Michael said, is a fancy name for a company borrowing money from you. We talk about having a certain amount of cash in your account for emergency purposes, right? So believe it or not, we all have possession that can go into establishing an estate, right? And growing up in Jamaica, I'll show you what I thought about an estate. This is my image of an estate. This is the only image of an estate that I know. But as you're gonna see today, while we talk about estate, there are different types of estates, right? All right, so that's the only estate that I knew growing up, all right? I'm sorry, I'm not an alcoholic, please don't judge me, all right? But yeah, the only estate I really knew of growing up was
it was Jerry and his nephew.
All right. I was told my jokes can be sometimes cheesy. I am glad people found that one funny.
But you know what? That estate was not owned by anybody who looked like us.
That is true.
Yes, that's true.
All right, you got to notice that. You got to know
yes,
that
absolutely. Good point, Rod.
And that estate came out of the slavery era too, my brother.
Yeah.
So let's not get that twisted at all.
Yep.
And that estate was built on our blood, sweat.
On our blood, sweat, and tears. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that is very, very relevant.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Good point, Roderick. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah.
We need to know. All right. So estate planning. So there are different parts to estate planning, and we are going to talk about all of these parts today, right? So, having a will. So we're going to talk about will later on in the presentation, a power of attorney. We're going to talk about a trust. We're going to talk about probate, and actually have some interesting statistics to show on probate. It's not in the context of Canada, it's in the US, but it can be applied, I think, to other countries as well, right? Talk about healthcare in the context of estate planning, right? So before we continue, I found this really nice video that really walks us through estate planning and some of the different levels that I want to share with you. So estate planning is the preparation of tasks that serve to manage an individual's asset base in the event of their incapacitation or death. So it's not only if you die, it's if you get sick and you can't help yourself, right? That you need to plan for the future, right? So let's look at this brief video here, and then we're going to continue the discussion. Hopefully you can hear this one this week. All right, can you hear the video? Can people hear the video?
No.
Not yet.
No.
I wonder what did I do the last time to make it play. Still no?
No.
Maybe you have to touch the screen, the sound on the video itself.
Yeah, I just did that. Let me try again. Nope.
No.
You'll have to press share audio right before you, it's in the bottom right corner, I think, right before you share the video.
The screen, yeah.
Where is that? Hold on.
When
So
you want to share the screen,
try to unshare this and then try to reshare, but right before you
Unshare
reshare
my
it,
screen. Oh, okay.
there's a step right before this. It says share audio.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Thank you.
I use a metaphor
Can we hear it now?
here in Pinellas County. I'd like to talk to you about some
Thank you
issues
so much,
related to the
that
aging
IT
process and
expert
the
there.
law. Specifically today, I'd like to discuss that dreaded issue of dying. They say in life there's only two things that are certain, death and taxes. When you die, you have some issues that you need to deal with. and specifically is where does your stuff go? How does it get there? And who's in charge of making sure that it gets there? We call this estate planning. Now, we like to talk about it, but it's an important issue to you have something in place for your family to make that process as smooth as possible and, to be honest, as cost effective as possible. Whenever I discuss estate planning with my clients, I use a metaphor of a ladder. So if you can imagine a ladder leaning up against a wall, there's various rungs on that ladder. Each one of those rungs represents a different way of planning for your estate. One of the challenges in dealing with estate planning is that there's multiple ways to get to your solution. Determining which is the right way is the difficult question. Now, we start out with that ladder. Imagine it sitting on the ground. There is that ground level. That ground level is what we call doing nothing. To be quite straight with you guys, doing nothing is an option. You don't have to do anything. Your estate will get to your heirs without you doing anything. There is something in the law called the law of intestacy that says that if you die, or when you die, that your assets will descend to your heirs according to a certain scheme or hierarchy. And it's something that we would normally think like our wife or our kids, it'll descend to them without the necessity of using a will. I don't oftentimes recommend doing nothing, but if you have a very simple estate with not very many assets and not very many heirs, doing nothing may be an okay strategy. However, if you're like most people, you are a little bit more complicated in your world. Moving up that ladder, the next rung is what we call joint ownership. Owning your assets jointly with somebody else is a way of having an estate plan. Most of us do this, and without even knowing it, we'll have our assets on with our spouse, or as we age, we may add our children to our assets. Why are you doing that? You're doing that, quite frankly, to make sure that if and when you die, that those assets go to your heirs easily because they are already an owner of it. They're a joint owner on that account. This is, again, good if you have fairly simple assets. You have one or two bank accounts, you have one or two heirs. This is an okay way of solving the problem. But if you add any further complications to that situation, you may need to move up the ladder. But before we go there, I do want to mention one other way of owning assets jointly. You can do that what's known as a beneficiary designation on your accounts. If you have a stock account, or if you have a bank account, a checking or a savings account, you can go to your bank and you can add a beneficiary designation on that account. It goes by different names depending upon which institution you're dealing with, but it may be called an in trust for account or go by the letters ITF. It may be a pay on death account, POD account, or it might be a transfer on death account, also known as a TOD account. You'll see that a lot of times with stocks and bonds and brokerage accounts. There's some advantages to doing this. The person that you place on that account with you is not an owner of that account presently, so that any of their problems do not come and become your problems with your money. It insulates your funds and resources from them, but still allows those assets to go to them when you die with very little or no effort. Now, if you have a more complicated estate, you'll need to move up that rung, up that ladder to the next rung. And most of us have heard of a simple will. Simple will, quite frankly, is probably one of the easiest ways of solving this problem. Wills have been around with us since the time of Caesar. They're basically instructions from you as to where your stuff is supposed to go, who's supposed to get it, in what share, and who's in charge of your affairs after you die. All of that is laid out within a will. Now, the legal requirements of setting up a will are very specific and really need the assistance of an attorney in some way to make sure that it gets done correctly. You wouldn't want to have a document that's not done correctly only to find out that your wishes are not being carried out because of some simple technical.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure what just happened there. It got kicked out of the video. All right.
Some simple technical requirement was not met. I strongly encourage you, if you are going in this route, that you have an attorney help you set that will up.
So I think that's it for that.
Will is an easy way of
that brief video. So let's go back to the presentation. I got booted out just now. All right. All right. So, I mean, you know, that video is pretty brief, and it talks about some of the important concept. It talks about planning for death. And here's the interesting part. I know a lot of us from the Caribbean, this is something that we don't talk about. How dare you plan for your death? How dare you talk about you're planning to die? It doesn't make sense. We shouldn't talk about that, right? But as the guy said in the video, what are the two most certain things? Can anybody tell me what are the two most certain things?
I know them.
Paying tax and dead. Die.
In my house, my family, we have a different too. We say stay black and die.
Oh, boy. Ah, okay. Yeah, I like that.
But you know, like fun and joke aside, like it's actually very, very important, right? And like when I share that statistics with you, you'll see. But estate planning is something that we all need to start thinking about. You know, even if we have kids, we need to have a plan for those kids. You know, in the event that I die or I become ill, who's gonna take care of those kids, right? So a lot of things that we need to start thinking about, right? So remember, in quite a few of my presentations, I've talked about how to make money, how to keep money, but how to transfer it. And part of this estate planning process involves transferring love and transferring possession, transferring the current you to the next generation, right? And there are certain things that you can put in a will. For example, your access to your Facebook account. A lot of people don't know that. What about your stories? Who you were? You know, you can put your passcode, etc., in that will so that your kids or whomever can see the type of person that you were, right? So even though it's something that we don't talk about growing up, it's still something we need to plan for in the event of an untimely death, right?
I have a question though.
Sure.
What is the psychological trauma or barrier to, especially West Indian, talking about will and death? Because this is an area where people are not maximizing on to put in place. So I'm thinking about, of course, I'm proactive. Why? So that we can get more people wanting to do it. Because it's one thing to talk about it, but it's another to put it in place. So I think that window, that gray area, the barrier that they will say, okay, it's okay to do this.
Right.
So I think, go ahead.
So Andre,
yeah.
May I just interject, because I put my hands up a couple of times, but you probably weren't looking.
Sure.
I just, as a segue, it was just going through my head, through my participants, that as of right now, it's only 182 years that Black folks in this part of the world, the Americas and the Caribbean, had estate to think about. They didn't even own themselves. So they weren't planning for estate and that kind of stuff. They could not pass anything down to any heirs or successors. And it's only 182 years, not a long time. So in our psychic, if we're not as far to tell you about the mindset, we have to now get that mindset out that we're now in a position to own things, including ourselves. I don't know if I've gotten freeze or cut off, but I hope you guys hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you, brother. We started continuing.
Right. So as I say, that's one of the things I always think about as I listen to the program. Okay. And we talk about various things that we need to do. Just a reminder all the time that we're coming from an handicap where that wasn't a natural part of how people want us to do what we do.
Right.
And it's only 182 years since we have been freed.
So I think what Michael's offering people is a sense of understanding of the journey and how where we started from. So if you're running a race, 100-meter race, but they tell you you're starting from 10 meters behind the starting line, and all the other cultures are at the starting line, we have to be understanding, mindful, patient, and hope, and have a sense of hope. Right, hope and intention or intentionality around what it takes to get there, right? So Michael's just emphasizing, from my interpretation, emphasizing that we have to look at the length of the journey and where we are relative to our circumstance, so we can say, okay, we are behind in many respects, but we were placed 10 meters before the starting line. Right. So let's recognize that we have the equal brilliance, the equal capacity to do all of these things that other cultures have been doing, who have not been who've not belonged as a product of another group, right? They've been able to do that throughout their history. And for us, we're disconnected from our history. So we have to start over, basically, is what Michael's saying. Is that a fair interpretation, Michael?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, give it a little more meat. As I try not to break the continuity of the presentation, but as I listen to some of these stuff, I am always reminded where we've started.
Yeah, it's very important to know where you started. Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that seems to answer like the question that you have, right, Marlene, in terms of the psychology and, you know, I guess understanding where we started, right, and where we need to go, right? And so, you know, it's where we started kind of trickles down into the culture that we have today, right? And it's something that we don't really talk about. I don't know about people here, but I've never grown up like hear people talking about will. I never hear anybody talking about estate, right? I didn't even know what estate is, right? And it's interesting, like some of the things that, you know, can be included, and we think we don't have these things, right? And one of the things that I recognize, and as we appreciate where we're coming from and where we want to go, it's important that we think about our children's future, right? Because we don't want them to continue starting over again. We need to put things in place. And so this is why estate planning is important, right? And utilizing the tax advantages and all the financial opportunities that are available to us. But that will only come when we know, right? And so that is why we also...
Andre, the laws of the U.S. in particular, was designed to ensure that the generations always start over.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, and you know, I agree. So the odds are always stacked against us. We always have all of these obstacles that we have to overcome.
And these are the rudiments of what we now refer to as things like anti-Black institutionalized and systemic racism, right?
Yeah.
If you were once owned as a piece of property, the owner is not going to necessarily want to empower you. Sorry?
You're breaking up, Michael.
So each new generation had to start from...
You're breaking up.
I think he dropped off there.
I just heard a drop off sound. But yeah, anyway, the point being that you know, all these institutionalized practices are meant to keep those of us who work Black people as property to remain property and not have any sense of ambition, you know, innovation, all those things that bring us forward to a place of equality. We're suffocated by systemic planning and racism and institutionalized process.
And that's one of the reasons why, again, we have to recognize and challenge ourselves to go the extra mile, to educate ourselves, and to make that change. And often we are the generation that is going to be doing it right here, right now.
Exactly. And I think there's some great comments in the chat happening right now. Thanks to Nick, Mona, a few other people. KG's making some great points. So the intention here, the benefit here is that as you guys share this positive information about we can do it, never give up, forward forever, forward ever, backward never. Love it. Like these are all the things we need to share and with our young people, because I remember our goal is to leave this circumstance better for those that come after us. And now if we talk about estate planning and the core purpose of it, that's the fundamental purpose of estate planning, is to leave the circumstance you leave behind has to enhance the lives of those you left it for, not be a burden.
Yes, and Farley,
that's a good point.
Yeah, and again, Farley, because the current legal environment, they may not practice it, but the current legal environment allows us that opportunity.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a good point. And you know, I hope as we're having this discussion that we are actually taking this conversation seriously, because this is I'll say, if not the most important aspect of everything we've talked about so far. Because this estate planning it's what you have built and you are moving it to the generation to come, right? It's very important. And just like I believe it was Farley who just said it, that we're not transferring burden, right? Because if you don't plan your estate properly, you can actually transfer burden instead of benefit, right?
And the thing is, with transferring burden, you're perpetuating Michael's point of having folks start all over from behind, 10 meters behind the starting line. So you got Usain Bolt and Donovan Bailey and Ben Johnson and Linford Christie at the starting line, and you're 10 meters behind them in the same race, starting before the gun goes off. Good luck, right? So we have to be mindful of that. And I just want to share one more point, Andre, is that there's a broader term to estate planning, and that's called succession planning, right? So when we and listen to the word succession, what word is inside that? I want one of the young brilliant minds to tell me what are the key syllables in the word succession?
Success.
Absolutely. Right. So if you have a plan of succession, right, it means that you're setting up someone coming after you for success. So that happens while you're here on this planet. I tell people all the time, live your legacy now. Don't wait till the funeral and people say nice things about you, whether you were nice or not. Guarantee that the things they say about you in your life are accurate when you're gone. Same thing with your succession planning. Set up your next generations or your surviving elements of your family, individuals in your family, set them up for success.
Yeah.
Right? Very important.
Very, very important. Thank you, dear Farley. I don't know, like this discussion is just amazing, right? So estate planning involves determining how an individual's asset will be preserved, managed, and distributed after that. So it's about the perseverance and managing and distributing, because a lot of the challenges that occur when a person dies, that they leave behind these assets, and people start fighting over them. People start arguing, right? And they divide families, right? And we don't want that. That can be avoided by just putting in place a plan that says, okay, I have 2 cars. Person A gets car A, person B gets car B, and so on and so forth, right? That can easily be talked about in a will, as well as addressing any outstanding financial obligations. So remember, in previous sessions, we talked about financial obligations. So it is amounts, so money that you owe to a lender, right? And then we've talked about like assets again. So some of the assets that could make up an estate. So house, car, stocks, artwork, life insurance, pension, and debt, right? So yes, debt is a part of the estate. So as you are living your life and enjoying, be sure to do it responsible, right? You don't want to be passing on significant amount of debt to your family member, and that could be your spouse or your children. And be very careful as to what you're getting into. I almost, well, not almost, I got a contract this weekend to sign. I was potentially going in a partnership with some people. And one of the clauses in the contract was talking about the burden of this contract being passed on to my heirs of my estate. And I said, no, I'm not going to do that. Like, why would I enter into an agreement that puts my family's future at risk, right? So be careful what you're entering into, and make sure that you're thinking about your spouse and your kids' future. All right.
Andre, just on that point briefly, I was in the same circumstance with something entertainment related, and there is actually insurance that can offset that in terms of burdens being transferred onto your successors, right? So, yeah, that's a good point.
Definitely.
I want to share. Somebody said in the chat, and I really appreciated this. Our spending habits are making intergenerational transfer really hard. So be mindful of that. That was Bajinder who said that. Very important point. So the way we conduct ourselves now has everything to do with our ability to have a successful succession plan.
100%. All right.
And Farley, can I interject as well? Don't want to sound like raining on the parade, but that habit of spending is also coming from how they trained us. If you can't generate wealth and pass it on to the next generation, you might as well spend it now.
Absolutely.
So that's the mindset that we have to change.
Right.
Very, very, very good point, Michael.
Yeah.
Very, very good point. And I, as much as this might seem initially to be disrupting the flow of the dialogue, this stuff that Michael's sharing is critical to our level of understanding. Because if we don't understand, we can't change.
I agree.
True.
I agree.
I agree. Yeah.
Very, very important.
And so with this, I'm thinking of a psychological training, because as Michael is sharing, my heart start leaping. Because I remember when I was depressed, I used to go buy something, think I'll feel better, until I understood that is putting me in more debt. So I think one of the key that is what we should be thinking is a psychological and emotional training that we need to have to detach from those toxic behaviors before we can actually feel good about ourselves, that, you know, I don't have to buy the next bling bling to feel like I'm a person. I can take that money and invest. So we have as somebody said, this generation, we have a lot on our shoulders, but perhaps we are the ones to sow the seed and put it in the ground.
That's right.
And let evidence says, wow, daddy did this and mommy did this. And I know whenever we're planting, you have to erode the soil first. This is erosion of systems and psychological issues before we can actually plant and feel good. So, you know, that's
I love that.
Deprivation.
Yeah.
Let's say deprivation and poverty are pervasive. So we have to be mindful of like a personal lifestyle technique called deferred gratification.
That need to be facilitated. Facilitation there, Farley. We need to get mommies and daddies and children in another flip floss and think and detach thing.
I love that. Flip floss and think.
Marley's just rebranding.
No, you've given me some idea to include in future presentations. The psychology. Right?
Well, yeah, as we know, guys, financial literacy is just one aspect of the social development that we need to go through. We will be providing, I'm going to put this out there right now, we will be providing other aspects of social and personal development that are required. That's what Urban Red Solutions does on the day-to-day. So,
and I say, if we make it mandated, come on this before you do that. And, you know, we need to lament and cry and repent of what we did and say, because only then can we have the transformational, transformative mindset to say, I got it, Farley, I got it, Roderick, I got it, Andre, I'm doing it. Because you know what, you can tell me now, and then I go back because, you know, I have some flashback, I have some emotional stress. Can I do this? Is it going to work? But we need that, we need to get cross the bridge before you come over. Cross the bridge, Help us to cross the bridge.
And remember that this is the 6th generation since we're freed. We, you know, our level here, father, myself, and so on, we are the 6th generation.
But how many of us know this? You see, this, I love this, but Michael, how many of us know this, that what you're talking about? Not very many. So knowledge is key. So if we don't know, we're just doing the same thing. Andre is giving us some awesome tools, but if you don't know how to use, why you use the tool and why you can't, you know, it's almost as if I have a brain freeze here.
Well, Marlene, remember I said at the top of the show, knowledge is great, but if you don't apply it, it's useless.
Yeah.
Okay. So so let Andre keep it moving, I guess.
So no, I agree with everyone, you know. So I think it's just a matter of like figuring out like personally how you can implement each of these, right? So okay, I've learned about estate planning today. How can I now, my job now is to go home and look at what I have,
implement it,
and implement an estate plan, right? So that's the key part, and I think Farley mentioned that earlier. So here are some basic elements of the estate planning process, right? So you have to appoint an executor, right? So this can be a family member. So you can appoint your sister, you know, your brother, or a close friend, but you have to appoint someone who would actually execute the will, right? So when you write that will or you create that estate plan, you'll need someone who would actually execute this. So this is a legal person. It can be a legal person, or a person approved by the court, like I said, a family member or a close friend, right? So you need to come up with a list of all the assets, all right? So Marlene, I am challenging you, and I'm gonna check on you next week. I am challenging you to come up with your list of assets and your list of liability and your plan to create an estate. You don't have to share it with me the next session, what is in that list, but I just need you to tell me that you've done your plan, okay? And so that's how we're gonna start the implementation process.
Okay.
Right? So this executor will be responsible for paying off the taxes. So notice that Mr. Tax Man don't stop when you die. They're coming, right? So if you're in Canada, the CRA, if you're in the US, the IRS is coming for the taxes, right? And any debt that is owed can be garnished. Assets from the estate can be garnished to pay off debt. So you also want to factor in the tax impact as well as the any liability that is owed. And we're going to talk about some of those tax impact in another session, right? I didn't want to make today's session too heavy, right? So the executor is responsible for filing the final personal income tax return on behalf of the deceased. So you must file a tax, right? I mean, a lot of people don't, but by law, in the Canadian Income Tax Act, you are required to file your final return. All right, so yes, dead people must file a return.
Just a clarification, it's not the executor, it's the executor.
So I actually looked at the pronunciation, and it can be pronounced both ways, actually.
Okay.
Executor or executor.
The inference that comes out of the way that you pronounce something has everything. That's what Rod's getting at. Yeah. If depending on how common the pronunciation is, then that's what's gonna happen. I was just gonna say though, if you could share with us the consequence, Andre, of not filing that final personal income tax. What are the consequences if you don't file it on behalf of the deceased?
Yeah. So well, it depends. So if it is that you don't have any, let's say you have a small amount of assets that don't have a significant value, it might be minimal, no impact, right? The government probably won't even come after you. I think the government is probably more concerned about estate in probably in the millions. So what will happen is that if you don't file the tax return and pay those taxes, the government will come after your assets, right? So let's say you've passed on a house or something to your kids. So when you die, right, in the Canada Revenue, in the Income Tax Act, there's what is called a deemed disposition, which means that the government assumes that you sold the property. So when you die, the government assumes that you're selling the property at fair market value. So if you have a house, right, for example, and the value of that house is, let's say, 600 and you bought it for 5, there is a deemed sale for 600,000, right? And if it is that is part of if the principal residence, the part that is exempt from tax, if principal residence doesn't apply, then you have to pay tax on that $100,000. It would be up to this person, the executor, as Michael said, to pay the taxes, right? If you don't have one, whenever if you don't have a will in place and this property has to go through probate court, for example, then it's going to be a costly process to go through that process, but you'll also have to pay the tax on that amount, and your kids or your spouse is going to be responsible for paying that tax, right? So that's why it's important to file that return and put things in place so that easily, even if this asset, this house, is a part of a collection of properties, if you pass this on to one of your kids or a spouse, they can avoid any tax by claiming the principal residence, because they can say, okay, I am going to be living in this property, right? This is going to become my primary residence, right? So to avoid that tax impact. So that's why that's one of the reasons why it's important to have this person, to have a will and to pay the taxes or to file your tax return, so that the CRA can know that, okay, this person passed, even though there's a deemed disposition, this person is going to be acquiring the property, right? And the impact, the tax will be deferred pretty much.
Andre, is a lawyer the only profession that can prepare wills?
Yeah, I would recommend a lawyer. I know some accountants will offer service to in terms of, there are accountants that are specialized in preparing wills as well. But I think a lawyer in estate planning and wills is probably the best option to have a will prepared.
You know why, Farley? Anyone can do a will, but in our time, it is so complex, so many variables. You should really get a trained person to do it.
Absolutely. That's why I want. That's why I want the exact point I wanted to get across. Both of what your responses were.
Yeah, and so and I agree. And you want to make sure, because if there are certain things that are not in the will, then it's almost like you never had one, right? So it's important that you have a professional who's an expert in the field, and I believe it needs to be witnessed, right, by a person who is able to do so, a person that has the authority to witness the will. Right. I think it's not working. Sorry, I think my seems like my internet is not working as well to me. All right, so this is the statistic that I wanted to share. Like I said, it's in the context of America, but it's very much applicable here in Canada, in Jamaica, and other parts of the world. So according to Laurie Ann Douglas, an estate planning and probate attorney based in New York, Black Americans are 50% less likely to have a living will in place in comparison to other groups. And I think this goes back into a lot of what Michael was saying. It's where we're coming from, right? So we need to have an understanding of where we're coming from, where we are at, and where we need to go, right? We need to get this number down. We need to have more people, more Black individuals and families having will in place, right? Because it can be a costly mistake not to have one, right? Because if it is that you have assets and there's no will in place, chances are when the kids are ready, it's going to cause argument, and it has to go through probate court, right? So a probate court is a court that looks at the assets and divide them up among the different family members. It sounds easy there, but it's a complicated process and it's very costly. All right. So we've talked a lot about will. This is kind of like a will to, to kind of break the heavy discussion about will, and just to let people know that there is actually a Will Smith out there if you want to check that will out instead of the will that we're talking about.
You know, Andre, Prince didn't have a will. Neither did Aretha Franklin.
Or Bob Marley didn't have a will either.
Didn't have a will either.
Yeah.
Wow.
A lot. I saw that this morning as I was reading up. A lot of Black celebrities didn't have a will. Like some really famous household names.
They had a won't.
All right. So, we've talked a lot about, will, as we were talking about estate planning. But again, so it's a legal document created to provide instructions on how an individual's property and custody of minor children, if any, should be handled after death, right? So, you can talk about, if you want to be cremated or if you want to be buried back in Jamaica or wherever you're from. So a lot of things you can flesh out in a will, right? The authenticity of the will is determined through a legal process known as a probate, right? So the probate is the first step taken in administering the estate of a deceased person. So when you have this will in place, remember I talked about the probate court earlier. When you have a will in place, it makes the process easier because the judge would be able to look at it and say, okay, this asset or this liability or whatever it is goes to this person and that goes to the other person. If that is not in place, then the state has to decide how the asset will be divided. And that can be a lengthy process because I'll tell you, the more complicated and more money and asset is involved in the process, the more you're gonna have family members and kids going at each other for who gets what. And we've seen this all the time, right? It's nothing new. I don't know if Michael, is there anything you wanted to chime in on there with in terms of your experience?
One thing I'd say here, again, I like to put it in a context that the whole concept of will and estate wasn't designed for us because back then we didn't have will and estate. So some of the elements that create a lot of challenges in will and estate is what comes down to the probate, As Black people, we look for different stuff, but if we adopt the existing will and estate that was not designed for us.
Right.
A lot of times we end up in problems.
That's an interesting question. How old do you have to be to start a will? What legal age?
Well,
Usually
I suppose age of majority.
Age of majority, 18.
Yeah, 16 to 18, I would
16,
think,
yeah.
in most jurisdictions.
So hold on, Justin Bieber at 16 when he was worth 180 million didn't have a will?
Probably not, because remember, the system they use now, look at the value base, and as Andre keep explaining, your net worth. So as long as you generate net worth, and if you're an actor, for example, at 6, 7, you can have a big net worth, but you're not at majority to do anything about it. It's handled by a trust.
It stays under your parents at that point, or your guardian.
Parents, yeah. Parents are guardians.
I have an interesting question. Is there anybody on the call of African, like continental African birth, that could share with us the process for estate planning in an African country, so a country that was not enslaved and hopefully not deeply colonized, which is hard to find. But I'm curious because a lot of the reasons Michael are sharing are post-transatlantic slavery realities. But I'd be curious to talk to a continental African presently who is aware of how estate planning is managed on the continent itself. That might be something we could look into.
Yeah, thank you very much, Farley, because that is where my history starts when we came to Americas or the Caribbean. So definitely, I know it wasn't done like that in Africa.
Yeah, so these are the things these are things I'd personally like us to bring forward in the narrative as we go, not necessarily today, but generally speaking, we have to look beyond slavery to find out who we are and how we did things. Because first of all, most of the practices that the rest of the world adopted came from us in the first place, right? So we're just disconnected from it through this as Rod refers to, the journey on the love boat coming across. Right? But what we need to do is really figure out from our brothers and sisters who are continentally founded and grounded, how things transpire in the homeland or in the motherland.
And if we find out what we can do in our present reality.
Yeah, we have to adopt.
Yes, of course.
We have to readopt our own practices.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think Amanda wanted to say something. You can go ahead, Amanda.
Hi, so I can't answer the question that was previously asked, but I saw Burjinder wrote a question regarding anywhere they can find simple wills, like that lawyers can be expensive, and I think the cost does throw a lot of us off. So I had a question regarding like virtual wills, because I see them like the potential all the time to like fill one out online and it's slightly, or it's pretty cheap, but I don't know if it's like necessarily legal. Do those work in like the interim before you can afford a lawyer, let's say?
I mean, just like we said earlier, so the short answer to your question is yes, it does work. So anyone can create a will, right? You can just get up and get a piece of paper and say, write on it, or just get a template and write on it. The issue is whether or not it's complete and it's not easily contested, right? Because you're gonna have creditors and people who, it depends on your situation, on how complicated it is, right? If you don't have significant amount of assets, and you're just, let's say it's just maybe a car and a small amount in a bank account, you can use one of those online wills easily. But if you have significant amount of assets, right, you definitely want to make sure somebody who is trusted and somebody who's a professional, you would want them to have them look over the document to make sure that it cannot be easily challenged, right? So yes, there are a lot of virtual online wills that you can use, but as your circumstances change and things get more complicated, you definitely want to have a professional. I've used the online will before.
Yeah,
the virtual will that you're talking about. Yeah.
So have I, but I still take it to a lawyer. The other thing is I think folks should know is that make sure you go to a lawyer that has the skill sets to do wills. You don't want to necessarily go to a criminal lawyer. Great example. A criminal lawyer to get your will done. Like make sure you research and always research minimum 3 to 5 options, and then pick the one that you're you feel most comfortable with, or you've done your research and you feel the most informed, you have make an informed decision. When you're looking for information, make sure you're informed. I tell people that all the time.
And
right?
check the review. Check the review.
Check the review, yeah. And one thing to add, people, is that the will is not, it's not the final will. Like if I wrote a will today at my age, my circumstances will change. So determine how frequently you want to update your will. Because you might write a will today, but it doesn't capture assets and things that you acquire a couple of years from now. So you want to constantly update the will, right? So the one that you write right now is not going to be the one that you have for the rest of your life. Another important aspect, and I don't know if I talk about it in a future slide, is to make sure that people can find the will, right? You don't want to be like, who have the will? Who have the will? And nobody knows where the will is. So you want to make sure that you can, so once you create this legal document, you know, you print it and you sign it, you want to make sure that a trusted family member knows where it is. If you want to put it in a safe, you can put it in a safe, but it's important to know where it is, because even if you write a will and nobody has access to the original document, it was as if there was no will.
Yeah.
Right? So that part is extremely important as well.
Just remember, folks, when there's a will, there's a way. You like that, Andre?
Absolutely.
Yeah, Andre?
Yeah.
So Andre?
Yes, yes.
I was just thinking about the comments that Amanda made earlier, and just reflect that of all the legal stuff that we have in the world, pre-slavery, during slavery, and post-slavery, that affect everyone, will is one of the most important things that has to do with holding real property and passing it down. And so during the time of the kings and queens and so on, that was a big issue. Who is going to inherit the throne at the death of the king?
Yep.
And so it's coming from there. And if you look at the history of those things, that is why it's sort of really, really important to ensure that somebody that knows what they're doing actually look at your will, because there's so many little traps that you can get yourself in there.
And Michael, I just want to remind you that you misspelled my name in your will.
that was intentional, because I know.
So actually,
I want to give it to your son that has the same
our governance director at the BBPA is a lawyer, and I know she's been talking about having some other workshops about estate planning, so stay tuned for that.
Beautiful. So we'll insert her into the Flip, Floss, and Fly family.
All right.
Nice.
I have a quick question, sorry.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, so I know we were talking about like will planning, but like how do we start that conversation? Because I know sometimes it's a bit of an iffy subject to start that with parents. It can sound kind of presumptuous. Mm-hmm. So do you have any sort of like tips? Like how do we start talking about like will planning?
That's a great question.
Yeah, I think it's one of those, as you just mentioned, one of those difficult conversations that we have to have. Mm-hmm. So, you know, often will planning happens when people are sick, or, you know, they're on their dying bed. But, you know, from the perspective of doing it when you're alive and well, when you know, you've got a sound mind, and then that's also something that has to be taken into consideration.
Yep, that's
an important part. Write a will or have anything in terms of that much of a legal obligation, or in terms of sending or allowing people to assume your assets when you're not in sound mind. So, you know, all of these things have to be taken into consideration. And, you know, we say, you know, definitely you want to do it on a good day, as opposed to a day when, you know, it's in a rush, or, you know, you're in a scramble to try to figure things out. So, you know, the sooner the better. And again, it's just one of those things in the sense of challenging ourselves as a community that we're going to have to just accept and change, right? And we know the consequences when there is no will. You know, when the government steps in and, you know, seizes your assets and
getting a lot of entanglements.
Yeah. You know, I should know this. What is it now? that government body that takes over when you don't have anything in
Say
place.
say your ABC, you will get the word.
All right, all right. I just can't remember. I'm trying to forget
I
that
think
one.
the intestacy section of the act applies when there's no will. I think it's called. It goes to probate court, and the intestacy act applies.
But before that happens, there's another entity that takes over, though. I can't remember right off the top of my head.
Well, to answer the question a little more directly, I think, and I didn't see if the young lady could say a word so I can see her name. Is it Elita? Is that the name?
It's Letta.
Letta, sorry. Okay, Letta. Right. So Letta, I think one of the general standard ways of approaching difficult topics is basically to just ask a question. So you empower the person that you're speaking with. So if you say to your parents, hypothetically, it's your parents, you say, have you guys thought about your estate planning? And you know, when remember, will has some stigmas attached to it. When you hear will, you think death. So a lot of Black people, as Michael said, will not want to attach themselves to that concept. But if you say, have you guys thought about your estate planning, right? And they say, let's say they say no, you say, oh, we should have that conversation, right? Mm-hmm. And this is where the key is. I don't think any parent wants to be a burden on their child. So you have to look at it from an angle, not from what you acquire, but what there is to avoid. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? So if you approach it from that standpoint, from a point of empathy and compassion and so on and so forth, and say, yeah, we should talk about estate planning because, you know, myself and let's see, your brother Farley and your other brother Roderick and your sister Marlene, you know, we're trying to do some really positive things. We just want to have a sense of, are there any encumbrances or whatever word you choose to use that if you pass that we will inherit, or is it something we could sit down and talk about? You know, it takes effort. You know, you have to go out on a limb a little bit, depending on the style of the parenting you received. That's also a big one, right? Because most people know what kind of response they're gonna get from their parents, especially when you become an adult yourself, right? So, like my mom's very open to discuss those kind of things, but I know other mothers and other parents are not. So,
and that entity that I was referring to is the public guardian and trustee.
There you go.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And believe me, folks, if they get involved in your affairs, it's not a pretty thing. I mean, I've experienced it myself with my own father, who didn't have everything lined up. And believe me, if they could take everything that you have within your household, they will do that. They'll cut the grass for $600.
Wow.
Believe me, no joke. So it's very important to have this lined up. Extremely important.
Yeah.
And I think Haley had a...
Go ahead.
I think Haley had her hand up.
Hi, Andre. This is Haley speaking.
Hi,
can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So I just wanted to ask in regards to, and maybe we can go over this, when debt isn't really mentioned in the will, how does that get put on to, you know, your future heirs and etc., right? Because let's say, for example, there's a house listed in the will, but for example, the mortgage isn't paid off, right? And you might have other associated, you might have other debts as well too, but it's not written on the will. How does that get passed down to your children? How does that all work out?
So if the liabilities are not written in the will?
Both. So if it's not written on the will, and if the house isn't paid off, but you want to acquire the house.
I mean, even if the liabilities are not written in the will, those creditors still have a claim over those assets, because at the time, most likely, when they were signing that contractual agreement with the creditor, they gave the creditor the right to probably seize that particular asset or something in return, because the creditors will want some type of protection, right? So in terms of not listing it, I think from a liability perspective, it's a little different. Like, you know, the creditors will still come, right, after those assets. In terms of, you asked about wanting to buy the property. if it's not listed?
No,
Was
no,
that the
no.
other part of the
He was
question?
asking.
Andre, can I butt in on
Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, your internet connection, Michael, is a little bit shaky there right now.
What I was going to say, Haley, is that. Sorry, Michael. Haley.
Debt process without the will. Let me. Am I back?
Somewhat.
Yeah, somewhat.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, the point is, at debt, the ownership inures to the heirs and successors. They now take on the ownership of that property and any responsibility that goes with it. That is how that debt can be shifted down to the next generation.
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
Because they own the property now.
Right.
Okay, so basically what we're saying here is if the house, for example, is written on the will, right? And I'm the heir, right? I'm to get the house, but you know, the mortgage isn't paid off yet. Maybe there's some associated debts. We also have, for example, line of credit there, whatever. Like I'm basically to receive that debt as well too. Like
yes, because you can't separate estate as an owner from the obligation of that estate.
Right. So it's written in the contracts of before you buy the house.
It's a nearby common law. That's what they call it.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of these natural things that happen, so you don't have to be written into it.
Right.
Haley, essentially what also I think the understanding is that once the asset is listed in the will, any encumbrances or debt on those assets would be inherited by the inherited, like yourself.
Okay.
That's the main thing to understand. So it doesn't matter how much of the house is paid off and all that. Once it's listed as an asset, right? All the people that are owed as far as the existence of that home, like the mortgage, like you said, line of credit, et cetera, that naturally that will inherently, to use the proper term, be assumed by you as the heir.
Right. And that's where insurance will come in, to have insurance to offset those additional costs. Right.
And this cements Farley's point to say you have to have those serious conversations with the mommies and the daddies, because sometimes they've inherited stuff that they didn't know they had or are not. So you need to open these conversations, as he said, some open-ended questions. Have you thought about a will? What can we expect? You know.
Well, the kind of discussion that I find that we often get, like within the Caribbean household, is it's like, oh, it's not your business. Like we don't want to be talking about this, and it's to that person's question there. Like, how do we have that important conversation that, you know what, this is actually my business, because I'm gonna have to, you know, incur the debt that you're actually, you know, that you've incurred over the years, right? So it's important for us to have this conversation so that I know what I need to be saving up, what kind of money I need to be saving to pay down your debt, right?
I mean, today is a great time to start. Hey, parents, I participated in a session about wills, and I want to talk about what I learned, right?
Exactly.
And share what you learn and the implications if these things are not in place. So I'd say today is a perfect time to start having that conversation.
And then, as Andre mentioned, that insurance is very critical in the sense of you can obtain insurance that will help pay off that outstanding debt. And obviously that will be a cushion for yourself in the sense of not having to come out of your pocket to deal with that.
Wonderful, wonderful.
And in most cases, your lawyer who's helping you with the will and whatnot will be able to get all the information on how much is owed, and then basically how it usually works, that they pay off everything that's owed first, and then they will give you what's left.
I have a provocative question. If you make a will and you leave a minor, like a baby or something, can you do that so they don't go after the baby for the...
So say that again, please.
Somebody put in a will that
that's a loophole there.
Grandma leave the house to the grandchild at 5 years old.
Okay.
Is that's a cushion?
No.
They'll go after the... Oh, yes?
Yeah, I mean, but I mean, the child will have to wait till they're of
Their
age,
legal
It's in
age.
trust.
Yeah.
right? Right.
So going to
But,
trust, yeah.
everything else will still, you know, be like they're not going to stop the, you know, the mortgage payments if that the person passes away and wait till the child is 18.
Okay.
Right. So and then again, you have to have an executor to deal with your function. If
And
not,
I'm going to rephrase what Farley said earlier. Where there's a will, there's a way, but not always a loophole.
All right.
All right. All right. So I have a question here, except for Michael, because I'm pretty sure Michael know the answer to this question. But there are three people, three people that the Income Act in Canada talks about, right? And so so one person is like us. We're human beings, so we're people. But there are two others. Who can tell me what those two other individuals, as defined in the Income Tax Act is? So other than people, what are the two other individuals that the Act talks about?
I think one is a corporation.
Correct.
But I don't know the other one.
Who else want to take a guess?
Keisha is on fire today.
She is. All right, let me see what people say in here. Partnership.
Somebody said partnership.
No, so partnership would be an individual.
Wills and Trust.
Could it be like not for profit or non-profit?
Not for profit would be potentially a corporation.
Okay. Wills and Trust.
Property.
Who's saying that? Is that I think Michael is talking. Is that Michael?
No, Marlene.
Yeah,
Marlene.
Sorry.
All right, so the third one is a trust.
Okay.
So there are three distinct people in the Act. So individual.
Actually, Wills and Trust. They combine both. Wills and Trust.
All right. So individual, corporation, and wills and trust. All right. So those are the three individuals. So a trust is treated as a separate legal person and entity from the person, and there are rules that govern how a trust is operated. All right. So we're gonna finish up. I mean, we've talked about trust already. We're just gonna cover a few more key concepts, and then I guess we'll just wrap up there. So some key concept here in terms of a trust. So there's a settlor in the trust who is the individual whose title of the property to the trustee. So that's a bit off there. And then the trustee is an individual who holds title to the property and manages the property for the benefit of the beneficiary, right? So these are some of the people that are involved in setting up the trust. And the beneficiaries, so these are the people who are going to benefit from whatever that is in the trust, right? So we're going to talk about some of the reasons why you should set up a trust. The first one that I have here is the management of assets. And again, so assets are things that we own and they generate some type of future value for us, right? So a trustee normally has significant experience in the asset management. So you know, this can be a person or a professional. I always suggest going to a professional, somebody who has experience dealing with asset management, right? Protecting the assets. So the settler of the trust may want to protect assets from creditors during a marriage breakdown or from individuals who might influence beneficiaries, right? So you definitely want to put things in place. So we talk about insurance, right? So you can have a term insurance that covers mortgage payment. You can have whole life insurance that will give some money to the estate to pay off certain debts or whatever. So insurance is definitely a key part in protecting assets and helping family members to cover certain debts. So Haley, you definitely want to have that conversation about insurance and things that can be done to mitigate you know, those liabilities that will be passed on. So controlling distribution. So a key component of setting up a trust is specifying how the assets will be divided. So who gets what? That's a very important part of it, right? I don't know about you guys, but I've had experience where, you know, when barrel come from overseas in Jamaica and everybody start arguing because nobody named on the item them. You have to make sure that your name is on the item because we know that barrel story, all right? Privacy. So this is another important part about trust is that after death, a will is probated and becomes a public document. So if you only stop at the will, so remember when we watched that video, there's a ladder and then there's will and then there's trust. So if you stop at the will, that your information can be shared publicly once it goes through probate. If you set up a trust, it becomes a private document, except in Quebec, right? Income splitting. So this is something that you're probably going to hear a lot more when we talk about the module on taxation. But there are rules in the Income Tax Act that allows you to split income. So what this means is that you are taking your income and you're giving it to different eligible family members to reduce the tax. So instead of one person getting all the income, you divide it among other family members. If you look at the Walmart family, for example, they divided up the wealth among all the kids, right? So this puts different family member, and it, you know, as part of the tax planning process, you want to put people who are in lower tax bracket, you want to give them some of the asset to minimize the tax liability on the estate or on when you're setting up that trust. So these are some of the things that are important in the process. And as we've talked about before, planning for tax, right, is extremely important. Again, insurance. So this is the another important component of the will. So put in insurance, and this can pay off taxes. It can cover the expenses, fund business and sell agreements, and fund retirement plans. So Haley, there's your answer right there. Having insurance in place. Estate planning is an ongoing process and should be started as soon as an individual has any measurable asset base. I was curious as to what they considered as a measurable asset base. And again, in terms of trust, in terms of a will, it can be anything, you know, a car, whatever. In terms of setting up a trust, the measurable asset base that they came up with is that once you have a minimum of $100,000, it is beneficial to set up a trust. All right. So will, you can create a will for whatever asset base that you have. If you want to set up a trust, the measurable amount that they recommend is 100,000. I mean, you can still set up a will even if you don't have, sorry, a trust, even if you don't have $100,000 in asset, right? As life progresses and goals shift, the estate plan should shift in line with new goals. And I mentioned this earlier. So it's not set in stone. It's not you do it today and you forget about it. It is an ongoing process that you're going to continue to evaluate and measure, and you're going to continue to change as the rules change, right? You always want to plan for taxes. Again, the two most certain things, death and tax. So you definitely want to plan for the tax impact as part of your estate planning. All right. So now we're going to take any last minute questions and have open discussion. That is the end of today's session on will. And next week, we're going to talk about the impact. We're going to go more into the tax impact on our estate. Any questions?
Final thoughts, questions, comments?
Queries?
Maybe, would you mind just reviewing on the first slide of trust? You had some notes on like the different people who were involved, like settler and trustee. Would you mind like just reviewing that? I just missed it.
Sure.
Sorry. Thank you. Awesome. Perfect. Thank you.
So this should read, actually, settler is an individual whose title of the property, who hands title of the property to the trustee. So it's read now, an individual who title, so it should be an individual who hands the title of the property to the trustee. So there's a small typo there. And then the trustee is an individual who holds title to the property and manages the property for the benefit of the beneficiaries of the trust. And beneficiaries, an individual or individuals who benefit from income and capital distribution of a trust.
So if you want to just break that down quickly, Andre, like just in a scenario of who would be like in terms of like, for instance, a trustee for the heirs of an estate. The
trustee? So yeah. The trustee is the person who is appointed by the person who's created, the settler, right, who is creating this trust. So for example, let's say I am creating my trust and I appoint Roderick as the trustee or Farley. And I say, okay, in the event of this, you're going to be the one responsible for holding this and distributing it to my kids or my spouse when that time comes, right? And so my kids and my spouse, they would be the beneficiary. They are the ones who will be getting the proceeds from my trust, right? And however I say that I want it to be divided, that's how it would be divided. And so I think in a lot of workplaces and even in the banks, what they do these days is that even if you have a stock account, one of the forms that you have to complete is a beneficiary designation form. So it will ask you, okay, what percentage of your account you want to be distributed to who, right? So you can put a value or you can use a percentage. It's easier to use a percentage because the value of your asset will change. So it's easier to say, okay, you know, Nathan, my son Nathan gets 50% of my estate versus Nathan gets 20,000. Because if I put 20,000 and my estate becomes 20 million, then Nathan will only get 20,000.
And he'll
right?
be vexed.
So it's better to put a percentage.
And he'll be vexed.
Exactly.
Can you also make a clear distinction between these following three things: trustee, power of attorney, and executor?
All right. So the executor is for a will, right? So the executor is a person appointed to execute a will, the contents of a will. The power of attorney is a person who you appoint to make decisions on your behalf. Should something, let's say you become mentally ill and you're unable to make those decisions. And I think we were talking about that earlier, but we didn't attribute it to a power of attorney. So if you are incapable of making those decisions, you can appoint a power of attorney to make those decisions on your behalf. And what's the other one, Farley? Was it a trustee?
Executive, trustee, and power of attorney were the three.
All right, and the trustee is so it's the trustee is somewhat similar to the executor, but it's a person dealing with the trust. So once you've established that trust, because remember I said earlier, the trust is a separate legal entity. So once you appoint that person for the trust, think of it like a company that hires a CEO to run that company. So you're hiring this trustee to run that trust on your behalf. All right, think of it that way.
And it could be the same person doing all three, technically, correct?
It can be the same person doing all three, yeah.
Okay.
I would give one person all that power, but
yeah,
yes.
All right.
Anything else, folks? So Rod mentioned earlier that our word of the day in terms of our 7 C's is challenge. So if we surmise all that we learned today, when we think about how we can challenge ourselves, Letta brought up a good point. You know, it's challenging to present this type of discussion with your elders or your parents or guardians. So challenge yourself to think differently, right? Find different approaches to, you know, if you're procrastinating about your will, doesn't matter how young you are, remember, right? If you're procrastinating about getting it done, you got to challenge yourself to understand the benefits of meeting that challenge. If you're challenged in terms of, well, I don't have anything to leave for anyone. So just challenge yourself to increase your net worth, right? Take all of this financial literacy training that's available to you and amass some path towards wealth and independence so that you can ultimately have something to leave from a succession standpoint, right? We're talking about the success that we pass on to those that come after us that we deem to be our beneficiaries. Okay, your role would be, we didn't use this term today, but the benefactor is the person that's leaving the assets behind for the beneficiary. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Anything else from anyone? Questions, thoughts?
And next thought, and the elders, the mothers, the fathers, to be open-minded.
Absolutely.
We need that to be empowered. What was the word you said? Challenged.
Yeah.
To deal with these stuff and just do it, as Nike said. Just do it.
Actually, that's a great question, Marlene. Do we have any multiple generational participation? Like, is there a mother and child, father and child?
And grandmother, please.
I'm getting there. Grandmother or guardian and someone from another generation who are participating on this training together. I'm just curious about that. I know we have a couple of young people, but I don't know if they're guardians or elders in their family or with them or not. But this is a great multi-generational experience. You know, one of the things when I was on Canadian Idol, the reason it was the #1 show in the country, viewership-wise, because grandparents, parents, and children watched it together, right?
I want to give a shout out to my daughter. She's on. Rochelle. Thank you, Rochelle.
Okay, so Marlene's daughter is on. Very good. Anybody else?
Father, son, dwells.
Oh, I see mother,
He
son,
wills.
and daughter. Good.
Father and son.
Usually my aunt and I are on the call. That's Amanda sharing that. Okay, so yeah, so it is open up to families. Nick just said, I think it should be open up to families. We have not placed any restrictions on this besides more of a guideline, but there's nobody who's been on the call. We say, oh, I'm sorry, you're too old or too young or too this or too that, too tall, too short, right? This is for everybody. You know, it's principally for people of African descent who have been challenged, as Michael has rightfully said several times. We've been placed in a position to be at a deficit. We're running a 100-meter race, but we're starting out at the -10 line, which means everybody's running 100 meters, and we have to run 110 faster or faster, obviously, to at least tie in the race, right? Equality is the goal, right? I want to leave you guys with this. There's a poet friend of Roderick's and mine, named Randall Ager. I just want to share this with you guys. He says, equality is everybody having shoes. Equity is everybody having shoes that fit them. So I know, Andre, you can use that in a poem one day. It's all good.
On it.
All right, so before we get out of here, we're going to ask everybody to share one thing that you've learned today, one takeaway. And don't forget to tell a friend to join us every Saturday morning here on Flip, Floss, and Fly, 10 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. And have yourselves a great week. And don't forget to challenge yourselves, challenge that status quo, challenge, you know, what has been, in not every case, because we're not asking you to challenge, you know, what is tradition, but challenge traditions that are not making us move forward. Because sometimes our parents don't know any better and they just go with what they've learned. And, you know, as Michael said, you know, we're only, you know, in some cases, 5 generations from when we were in bondage. So we've got to challenge the status quo from what we've learned, because not always is it correct, right? Now we know better, we do better. So without a doubt, let's take it away. Please share what you've learned in that chat.
Rod, can I make a song request or what?
1,000%, my brother.
Let me get some OJ's money, man. OJ's money. Money. Marlene doesn't know that song. Marlene, listen closely, Marlene.
All right. OJ's, okay.
The OJ's.
I know the one, Forever Mine. You know that one?
That's a great song.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Are we getting everybody?
This is one of my favorite songs of all time, people. So just
the money.
And this one coming up now.
All right. Cool.
So while we're putting this up, we're gonna ask everybody again just to put your final comments on the session today in that chat, and we're gonna lead out with money. All right.
Connected.
Stay safe, everybody. Smile. Bring love with you. Don't forget to tell a friend to join us, but also to share what you've learned throughout your circles.
Let's hit 100 next week, everybody. Let's hit 100 people next week.
All right.